Okay, it looks like we've got a good crowd, so I think we can get going. So, good evening, everybody. Great to have you all here. For those of you that don't know me, I'm Matthew Jarron. I'm the museum curator here at the University of Dundee. One of the various roles that I have here at the Museum Collections is to look after the artist book collection that we have at the university. One of our most interesting collections. We have nearly 1,500 artist books altogether, covering a huge range of different styles and forms and so on. And some of you will recall that we did a similar event to this, actually it's 3 years ago now, extraordinarily. And that was really successful, and we've been looking for an excuse to do another one ever since. And so we decided that Dundee Women's Festival would be a great opportunity to introduce you to some more of the wonderful artists that are represented in our collections. But I'm not going to say any more tonight because we're delighted to have with us Professor Maria Fusco, who is Professor of Interdisciplinary Writing at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design, and indeed a creator of artist books herself. And so she's going to be chairing the event. So Maria, I will hand over to you.
Thank you, Matthew. Welcome, everybody. It's lovely to see so many people here. You're all very welcome. It's great, isn't it, that we can all kind of be together remotely. So this is a special event for Dundee Women's Festival, which is an annual festival here in Dundee, called Speaking Volumes, Women in the Artist Book Collection at Duncan of Jordanstone College of Art and Design. Oh, I hear somebody speaking. Sounded quite animated. So we've got 4 speakers here today. We need to finish promptly at 7, so I'm going to try and be quite strict with my timekeeping because I really want to have time also at the end to give you an opportunity to ask some questions of our 4 fantastic speakers. If there are any questions that you have, please pop them in the chat. I'll endeavour to do my best to keep up with all the different questions. Our speakers will run in the following order, so there'll be Egidija, Imi, Heather, and then Helen. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce them in pairs. So I'll begin by introducing Egidija. So Egidija was born in Lithuania and is currently based in London, pursuing an interdisciplinary PhD at the Slade and UCL Linguistics. Her practice is informed by her research and interest in linguistics, with a particular focus on cognitive pragmatics and relevance theory. Most of her work is considered visual poetry, marked by ethereal layers of spoken or written words. It questions definite natures of linguistic encounters. And our second speaker is Imi, who is a visual artist based in Bergen, Norway, and has been working with the artist book alongside other media since 2001. In collaboration with Randy Annie Strand and Rita Marher, she established Codex Polaris, an artist-run collective that promotes artist books in Norway and the Nordic countries through curating and designing exhibitions, initiating collaborative projects, and taking collection of bookworks to fairs around the world. So without further ado, I'll hand over to Egidija, and then Imi, if you wouldn't mind following straight on from Egidija, that would be lovely. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Maria. I'll share the screen now. So, yes, thank you, Maria, for introduction. Yes, my name is Egidija, as you can see on the screen. And the surname is pronounced Ciricaite, but you don't really need to know that. Most people know me as Egidija. I'm an artist and I do books. And I'll split this talk into 2 parts. I'm setting the timer for myself. I know that there's timekeeping, but I will do that. And I'm expecting to be on time in 10 minutes. Sharp. So I'll split it roughly into 2 parts. I'll do sort of more generic talk, like for a couple of minutes about why I do books and why books work for me as a medium. And I'll do the second half, or I'll talk a bit more about a specific work that I made. So as Maria has said, I work with books, but my primary interest is language. And I largely play with and around language. And what I do is often considered visual poetry. And Coleridge has said that poetry is the right words in the right places. So I basically put a lot of words in all sorts of places, hoping that some of them will be in the right place and it will work. So I play with language through writing of all sorts, writing in a very broad sense, through publishing of all sorts, again, in a very, very broad sense, research. As somebody has said, I create worlds at the periphery of linguistic experience, and which entails playing against the idea of definite nature of language, linguistic encounter, and working around those multiple layers and contexts of meaning that we negotiate every time we make a conversation in attempts to make sense of each other and of the world. I'll be using more recent works as a backdrop to what I'm talking, without going too much into them. But if you have questions about specific works, you can ask me. You can ask me or email me or message me. So yes, I was born in Kaunas and in Lithuania, but I'm based in London now, and I am working on PhD at the Slade and supervised by UCL Linguistics. Now, although my primary interest is language, most of what I do comes out in the form of books. And why do I use book as a form? What's in it that works better for me than, for example, print, straightforward 2D prints, or video work, or simply writing poetry in straight lines like many people do very well. And I have been thinking about it, and I think it's the sequencing and layering and that almost cinematic experience in certain circumstances that you can achieve with the books. Books allow me to explore the language in flux, that unstable moment in language. It allows a glimpse into the next and the preceding and the next and the preceding. I often work with translucent papers, semi-translucent papers, Chinese, Japanese papers. I have got some examples here, but I don't want to fiddle with screen sharing at the moment. But the ones you can see, for example, the one in the middle is Tangujo Kashmiri, which is 6 GSM paper, and it is so light it is barely there. When you print on it, the ink is heavier than the paper. If you breathe in its vicinity, it just floats up and flies away. The paper is barely holding the text. The ones on the sides are typewritten on slightly heavier paper, which is Inoshi and 12 GSM. It is it's much more stable paper. I know that 12 GSM doesn't really sound like paper at all when, printer takes 80 GSM, but trust me, there's a huge difference between 12 and 6 GSM. So I work with those layers, semi-translucent layers. A lot of my work is layered. And it works as a metaphor for that encounter, the multi-layered, multi-contextual, unstable space of language that is always in flow. It's like we have those photos on iPhones and the live photos. So you look at a photo and it looks like a snippet of the moment. A shot of time, but then you hold your finger and it changes. You see what happened before, what happened after. It moves. That's how I see my works. Those moments in time that take time to exist. Those moments rather than snippets of time. Although short ones, they still take time. And I enjoy book because it allows me to rebuild those moments. I'm not sure if that made sense, but I hope it has. So those images that I've been showing now, they are from my most recent works, from Lovatėse series. Lovatėse means bedspread in Lithuanian. I have been working with textile patterns from Lithuania. But that's not what I want to focus on today. I want to focus on something else. I want to focus on this book, which also very much centered on language, but it's slightly older. It precedes the other books by a couple of years. It's a book that connects me not only to Dundee University, because it's in the collections of Dundee University collections, but it also connects me to Maria Fusco, because it was made after she did a talk at Artist Books Now event. So I used it was made, as you can see, some time ago before COVID. I used to be part of the organizing committee at the Artist Books Now events at the British Library. And for those who don't know, they were they monthly events? I can't remember, maybe bi-monthly events that focus on artist books of all sorts being produced in the country. And there was a bit of show and tell, and there was a bit of talking. We'd have a couple of artists before a discussion and a couple of artists after discussion. Everybody would bring their own work. They were hugely enjoyable, and I'm not just saying because I was part of the organizing committee, but I genuinely think they were very enjoyable. And so after those events, it was not unusual to receive an email from somebody, who were part of the event saying, oh, this was really lovely. Thank you very much. And after that event, I received one of those emails, and it was a slightly different one. And the difference in that was the language. And this is all the full list of words that it contained. It was a fascinating email. And because Maria was talking at the event, and she was talking about her writing, and it made me think, sort of connect that very, very complicated email, those 34 words. So it's a very short email, but very complex language. It made me connect that with what Maria was talking, and sort of and back to the email and back to the talking. And those ideas of artist, editor, and curator in the writing and in the production process. So fascinated by the email, and it was not a bad email, it was very positive. It's just that the words were so abstract and so complex and so vacuous that there was nothing holding them down to produce meaning. So what I did, I put all those words into this randomizer. It was pre-AI, so we couldn't actually replicate this page as we can now. My son forwarded to me, and I randomized the words and randomized them again and randomized them again, and I came out with this text. And the text, I kept multiplying the text and randomizing it until it looked like 7 pages, basically, because 7 pages makes a good kind of essay. You will agree, a solid essay has some pages. It's not it's not 2 paragraphs. So I kept randomizing and sort of experimenting with the language. And what I found exciting is that this vacuous abstraction of words still made sense when put together, because you could pretty much make anything out of it that you wanted. And it sort of echoed back on that idea of the editor, the editor, the artist, and the curator. So I decomposed the email into a lot of words, recomposed it into 7 pages. Oops. Okay, 30 seconds and I'll be done. I recomposed it back, and I ended up with good 7 pages of text. Then I looked at how to decompose that language further down, and the book ended up as a triptych. So the first section has the essay about literary zonal transitions. The second one was the same text decomposed into letters, and the final one was the same text decomposed into ink specs. So sort of degrees of decomposition of that same email and how it disappears. I'm over time now. So I'll round it up. Now, oh, I have to say that I did marble the paper myself. But I'm too rubbish to reproduce papers that was digitally reproduced. Now, these the works that I showed at the beginning, they're more recent ones, and if you are either in China, Chengdu, or I'll be there later this month with those works. I'll be at Bergen Artist Book Fair. So if you're in Norway, you could come and have a chat and have a look at them in person. I'll be in Malmo as well, in Bergen in Norway, and Malmo in Sweden as well. So if you're around, please come, and in Bristol in June. If you want to see this and some others, those ones in person. I think I'm done. That was quick.
Egidija, thank you so much. little virtual clap there.
Yes.
Thank you, Egidija. Can I invite Imi to share screen next, please?
Right. I'm going to do a two-part talk. Firstly, about my work, and very much based on the collection that Dundee has of my books. I've been working, like Maria said, for the last 20 years, focusing mainly on books that have the theme of translating travels. So really, how does a book how a book can be used to transfer an experience, especially of journeys. And then the second part, I will talk a little bit about Codex Polaris. So these are a few of the books that are at Dundee. This one is Malbik Endar, where I cycled to Iceland from the UK on a 121-day cycle journey back in 2020. And this book is a sort of flip book version that has 121 pages. Each page has one or two words from the diary that I wrote during the time. And it was very much about distilling text to make a visual expression of a journey that nobody else could experience. And this second one is Getting Lost, and it's about getting lost on a cycle ride, and was very much about how you use the paper and the folded paper to pass on that information to the reader. And it's cut on a one sheet page on a spiral cut, and is exactly that. When anybody reads it, the pages turn round. And if we have time at the end, I have a couple of these books with me that I can show how they are visually opened. And this one is 36 Tunnels and a Ferry. And this was letterpress printed, and I'm always very aware of how, like the page size, so the page size and how much information I need to get into the book refers to how the book size ends up at the end. So this is a tiny book. It's only 5 centimeters by 5 centimeters. And it was a journey on a bus through the Norwegian fjords, very beautiful. And I ended up distilling it down to all the signposts with the tunnels. So it becomes a sort of poetic piece with the names of the tunnels and how many meters long they are. And it also, when it opens, it forms a tunnel, which you can see here. And that was a nice coincidence at the end. A lot of these single books that refer to journeys have been collected into my translating travel suitcase. So there are 16 different adventures in this suitcase. And I've also done a lot of residency projects that refer to journeys. This is one on the Swan, which is a sailing boat from Shetland. And it was during the tall ships races that I was invited to be an artist in residence for 5 weeks, and then had 5 weeks on land afterwards. And I thought it was actually going to be a very quiet journey. Little did I know about the tall ships races, But at the end of the project, I had a collection of 2 artist books, several silk screen printed works, and wooden postcards that I'd thrown out in the sea before, during the voyage. And these were collated into a boxed work. I work a lot with boxes as well with my book works. And I'm also interested about how books travel themselves. So this is another residency project, Visual Arts in the Rural Communities, up in Northumberland, where I was based for 1 year. And during that time, I made an edition of, or 8 editioned books. And this version, the bookshelf, was placed in the mobile library. So people could actually take the books out and have them in their living room, just as you would loan a novel. And the second version of that year was a suitcase version, which included several other artifacts and artifacts and a journal, and also the catalogue for the exhibition. And this box was placed on a bicycle, which I cycled out of the valley, visiting several cultural venues and schools on the way to Northern Print in Newcastle. All of these works that I've been working on since 2021 have been placed in boxes, which are then placed in boxes. And I think a lot of this has been influenced by my studio is based in Bergen Container Harbour. So this is what I walk past every day, the containers, and they change every day, and things come out of these boxes as well. So my books have all been packed into this crate, which is 80 centimetres by 60 centimetres. And then this explodes into exhibition spaces. This was first curated together for Edinburgh printmakers in 2018, and then expanded in 2021 at Kristiansand Kunsthall. And that's another view from that exhibition. So that's very much about my personal work. And then Codex Polaris, since moving to Bergen in Norway, we established a book art group with Rita Marhaug and Randi Annie-Strand in 2013. And I really to promote the artist book in Nordic countries, which we've been doing through book art, taking book art collections from Norway to different book art fairs around the world. This is in Shanghai in 2018. And organised the Codex Nordica at Codex Book Art Fair in 2019, where we had 6 stands, one for Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland and Iceland, and a 6th stand for Bibliothek Nordica. And Bibliothek Nordica is a collaborative project which I worked on with Megan Addy and Bent Quisgaard, where we invited artists from the Nordic countries to produce an edition of 11 A6-sized books to make an edition of 10 of these libraries, which I can now say one is placed in the British Library and one in Gothenburg University Library as well. So they will soon be available to see in different parts of the world. So this ended up with 82 books in it, and they have been travelling all over the place to different book art fairs and exhibitions. This is at Kristiansand Kunsthall in Norway. And from a little bookshelf, which is about 40 centimetres by 40 centimetres, this one can also explode into a larger exhibition room. And I'm really interested about how artist books take up space, because I think we're very used to them being small and tidy and neat. But they can also, take up space in a room. So this is Bibliotheca Nordica. And the last project that Codex Polaris has been working on, which was shown at Kristiansand Kunsthall and Library, is Kunstnerbøken Unique and Mangfoldig, the artist book Unique and Diverse, where we had 600 square meter gallery space, a fantastic room. So we went big and invited artists working in large scale or in installation type works. So this is Sarah Jost and Emilia Turner with 2 large scale works. And these ones, Eva-Lisa Issamer and Thomas Iversen. Thomas Iverson's here on the right, which is a chain link made of books that were being thrown out by the library. So we really tried to get a diverse group of a diverse range of artworks within this exhibition. And this is Pis Protter, who is a Danish group who've been producing an art catalogue since the 1980s and created an installation in the exhibition space. So I think from working for the last 10 years, this is one of the biggest projects that we've been working on with Codex Polaris, and really brought together the Nordic countries or Nordic artists working with books in a very variety of ways. So I just thought I would show both my practice and this collaborative practice that has taken a lot of organisation, but has also been a really good fun and a great experience to work in. Thank you.
Fantastic, Emmy. Thank you so much. I give you, because I've got my mic on, I can do a clap. I'm going to now introduce our next 2 speakers. Heather is a poet, theorist, and artist bookmaker who's currently reader in poetry and poetics at the University of Dundee, as well as visiting faculty at the Bombay Institute for Critical Analysis and Research, and a member of the artist book research collective Spineless Wonders. Her solo and collaborative work has been shown, read, and performed internationally. The primary live archive of her artist books and poetry objects may be found in the Scottish Poetry Library, with subsidiary collections at the National Library of Scotland and the ABC Dundee. Helen Douglas is an artist based in Scotland. Her commitment to the book and publishing as an art practice now spans 50 years, publishing under the imprint We Productions, as well as the Visual Arts Studies Workshop Rochester, Nexus Press Atlanta, Pocket Books Edinburgh, and Tate London. Her books are primarily visual with embodied text, engaging with book structures, photography, and printing to develop visual narrative and poetry. And in 2006, Helen was made life member of MoMA in New York in recognition of her work and books. So if I can invite you, Heather, to share your screen, please.
You should be able to now all see with me. Thanks. Maria, I can see you, so I can see you nodding, which means that if I'm running over, please start gesticulating wildly, but I will try to keep absolutely to time. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and it's nice to see so many people that have been collected in different collectives and collections for so long. As Maria intimated, I came to this mode of making not primarily as an artist, but as a person who works or thinks through poetry, through a series of concerns with how poetry objects, pun fully intended, the sense of a poem moving beyond a simple voice or a page, and the way that this charts thoughts and expressions by material, immaterial, or textual, shadowed and shadowy means. Hence, most of these, and you can see, we're being visualized, you can see with me, I would probably call poetry objects, rather than artist book per se, though one finds that these taxonomizations and pigeonholings themselves very quickly give rise to questions and objections and objectifications and interesting resistances. So resistance, objection, handling, speaking out, exposure, erasure, transparency, shadow effect, gesture, and inscription, and speaking to the commons of communication, these bookish spaces, I find, can give rise to investigations of and within all of these terms. So there's a sort of odd communicative reciprocity just in the making process. And today, I'd like the objects to speak, object or enact for themselves. So what I'd like to do is rather than sort of speak more conceptually, is to take you through a suite of these sort of here's your scale, hand or palm-sized works. And if we have time, one that moves just outside of this paradigm, that chart a journey through thinking questions of space. That has been my sort of, my way of conceptually moving through this. So thinking questions of space, questions of exposure in its most negative and most positive forms, questions of the obdurateness of the object and the space of communication or collecting, and the variant difficulties and intransparities of thought and the thoughts of the poetics of thinking. So I'm going to speak some of them to invisibilize them momentarily. And what I'd like to begin with now is a very, very early work. I think it might exist in the Artist Book Collection Dundee in a different form. We've seen some washi paper, and here is some more kind of very thin Japanese, it's a mulberry washi paper. And this is a sort of a making, unmaking move, the art of epic. And it's a draft because I don't actually have any of the fine copies anymore. So pardon the scribblings. The art of epic. Penelope's womb weaves amphibrass. The shuttle rhythm unpicks sound, breathing almost silently, making from absence a treasured space. Whilst in the hall men shout, dogs bark, and a blind poet sings. The art rests not in what is to be done, but its undoing. Penelope weaves, rhythm unpicks sound, silently making space, whilst men shout, a blind poet sings. The art rests in its undoing. Penelope unpicks space, things, its undoing. Epic pacing is doing. Thing. Glad the table's quite big. And more recently, sort of concerns with spatial disposition. Haris a Ranal, or arctures. I will call the height of anything that is to be taken rule, the altitude without any more words. That's from Chaucer's treatise on the astrolabe. Logical space precedes space, which precedes empirical space. Space is non-coincident to itself. Space as self-spatializing space has no self or limit. Or think self in space, spatializing space. Think limit in space, spatializing space. Or fail to think, begin, draw lines on milky ground, body angled askew, arced by subject matter or tuned thus for maintenance, so says the rule, asks for space, and on this high, what is your imprecision or determinate misprision? Think being in space is not, think space in being is not spatially correspondent, or thumbing with an instrument the dark unseen, one sun seeks out thy old angle by the northernmost rule, odd and now by number obscured. Something is, and to not Gordian or no or nothing. We On the dark hill of a wave, draw 1,000 unique lines to be erased, principle by uncertain principle, or draw or scatter or tie 1,000 lines or points. And is to cut the O, a gap or one, a voiding space, and all two safe distances, all angels on a pinprick, or two moons wane, wax, contain, containment, a close keeping, and the search for the dimmest star or non-compossible, the pace of the count of the limit. And I think, how am I doing? Maybe one more. There is a bad pun with tears and tears that I think anybody that works with paper will enjoy far too much. This tear or tear is a working through in material means the question of Daphne, but what I would like rather to move on to is a site of correspondence. So this is a suite of tears or tears that were in fact a kind of, it's one of a suite called Fascicles, and they were a sort of a pandemic related mail art project with the artist Tim Brennan, who I think is here today, sort of exploring or exposing questions of transparency and the vectors of dialogue. The images are Tim's, the tears or tears are my own as well as the words. Desiccant. I have eaten moss and birch bark and willow shoot. I, who now crunches on stone, wonders about you. What is it the hide stretches to avert? How is it we have found ourselves here, each as if configured behind a glass, each reaching out of dust for a different frame when? Arrested, we breathe through gills and indecision, still to a petrified service by movement beyond the screen, yet build some strange soft sanctuary there, a tooth cracks. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I think we're all in love with your little visualizer. I think we'd all love one of those.
It's amazing. I can fully recommend it. It actually folds up and it's basically pocket sized. And so
I've used them in lecture theatres before, but I didn't know you could get one at home. There's just a very super quick question, and it's a yes or no for you, Heather, which is that it's from a bear, and it's a question. I think it was the second book. Is this a papyrus?
Yes, it's a mixture of mulberry, washi, which is 40 GSM, and papyrus, and wax, cotton thread, and Istrian stone.
Lovely, thank you. That's super. Helen, I believe Matthew's operating your PowerPoint.
Yes, I hope so. That's it.
So I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, yeah. Well, I'm going to talk about my books, moving from codex to concertina to scroll form. Next. Yeah, the first book I published was Threads in 1974 in an edition of 200. I was threading my thoughts through the page. These are printed. This is a detail looking through the page. Next slide. And in the center, you can see that the book itself was threaded. Next. It was shown in the Artists' Bookworks exhibition, which was a travelling exhibition. And I put this in because of its link, I think, with the Dundee book case for exhibiting books. This was a travelling exhibition which folded screens, and you can see the box of books. So it was a very much conceived as a travelling exhibition. It was at this time that I began to talk with Telford Stokes, and we began a collaboration which then went on for nearly 30 years in We Productions. And these are the first two books. Next slide. What drew me to the book was it was a place where I could put my thoughts and my visual ideas and feelings in a simple form or in a sequence of pages. And I think this cupboard in Chinese Whispers really makes that point. The cupboard was made to the proportion of the open book. So the open book is, as it were, the cupboard. And in the next slide, and in the build up to the cupboard, you get the construction of the cupboard. So in a sense, there was a construction of the narrative and a construction of the book. And this is what I meant by book form. Next slide. Once the cupboard was made, it became populated by objects. And this was because there was a desire to investigate the idea of the natural world, of the spiral of life, underground, overground, underground, on the ground, and overground. So an earth cake is found, roots are found. This was cut, if you want. It opens from the spine, the pea pods pops open, and the cabbage leaf, the back and front of the page. So it was using the book form to explore a visual narrative idea of nature. Next slide. In moving to the countryside, there was a kind of great sense of openness. And I think this accordion book, made in 78, expresses that. This is like a sort of breath from the chest. Next slide. And then really 20 years later, I made Wildwood. Next slide. And this is using the book in a very, very different way. I really wanted to lead the reader in through a kind of sense of enchantment into the book and through the page, through the book and through the pages. Next slide. Through the page into the storm. Next. And then back into what I called the safety of the book, where the borders become constructed and contained. So this wildwood, as it were, is a wood that exists within the book. These were the thickets which needed sorting. Next slide. And then, in a sense, the borders build up, and that enabled me to bring in what I felt was the community of the wood. That is the bark, the lichen, the snails. Next slide. And flowers, and also the sense of through the borders, allowing the eye to move on through the page. And I was very influenced by the Hastings books of hours, which were made in the 1480s. This idea of in the page, on the page, and sort of in the lap of the reader. Thank you. And finally, there is a burn, a waterfall in this, and it is really that sense of wanting, the wood to flourish and the importance of water in life. Next. Water is a really important theme of my work, and this, I go quite quickly, is a book called Water on the Border. And here I'm using the book, this is a collaborative book with children. And I'd been working with children in the school where my son was, and was very aware of the calligraphic way of working on the page. And so the idea of going to China and working with children in China grew as well. And I took the photographs of this reflections of the water, drawing that to the page of the book. So now, rather than working through the page, into the illusions of the page, it's much more working across the page. Next slide. And this carried on in my book Between the Two, photographed. I'm working with the coldness of winter, stalks against snow. This calligraphic mark. Next. And then moving along the French, again, this thing of moving across the page, but here an arabesque threading under. So using the page and the book form in different ways, and the butterfly can fly. Next. And this led to a kind of flowering within the book. And this is, where I brought in a different sort of paper to slow the reading down to a kind of peeling, a discovery of the flower within the book, in the intimacy of the book, that idea of the reader and the book and that handheld art form. Thank you. The way I put this book together was across the floor. And here you're beginning to see this way that I began to work, moving across, almost finding the phrases in the book. Next slide. Whereas something like Wildwood was very much made with a storyboard where I worked it out because I needed to contain each page, contain the book within the pages of the book, as it were, rather than across the page. Next slide. Unraveling the Ripple is also working across the page, but again, it was folded into the Codex, which is such an economic form of book. It would have been totally unruly as an accordion. But I was, next slide. But it was also with the turning of the pages, I was able to move from the fluidity of the sea and to the dryness of the sand and the plants and the seaweed, etc. So there's this sense of fluid to dryness to then back to movement again, and the turning of the pages enabled that. Thank you. But finally, by about 2004, I did start making concertinas, and this was a collaboration with Zoe Irvin. She did the sound piece, and I made the book. We explored Proust's country, and also by reading his novel In Search of Lost Time, there was very much this idea of moving from fact and fiction, and from something seen to something felt or something remembered. So as well as moving across the page, I'm moving backwards and forwards in the page, but also in a sense thinking of Proust's long sentences, which he actually wrote in manuscript form, often in scroll form. Next slide. And this is how this was made on one sheet of B1 paper, and then folded with a map making folding machine, something that's not around anymore. Thank you. But of course, at that point, there was a real tension about would the book survive? And I began to think very much about perhaps also creating smaller editions. Printers were beginning to go under. So I started printing digitally, and I was also thinking of the nature of scrolling and how we had all begun scrolling through the digital. Thank you. And that led to me realizing that I could finally be able to make or honor this idea of the arm's breadth with the scroll. So, these are now, if you could say, much larger pages, which the reader can work to whatever size they want. This was a collaboration with Valerie Gillis, with Dundee University Poetry Beyond Text. And Valerie and I worked quite closely together. She gave me 8 two-liners, as it were, which is a Chinese form of poem. And she wanted me to soften them in the process of me making them, of sort of dipping them, as it were, into the image of the water. Next slide. Next. And I think you can see how using the digital printing, very fine paper, Chinese paper, Xuan paper, I was really able to work in quite a painterly way. Thank you. And this then led on to a much more ambitious scroll, which was about 40 meters long. And next slide, and I just completed making that when I was invited to be part of a research project with Tate and University of the Arts, the V&A, British Museum, and it's called Transforming Artist Books. And I was asked to speak about transforming the medium. And so I said, I would really like my scroll to be put onto an iPad. The beauty for me was this, as well as the scrolling across, the way with an iPad you could go into the image. So there was something of that Wildwood thing of going into the page, albeit a screen. Thank you. And then here you can see, I suddenly realized, though, having done that, having made this app for the iPad or working with Armadillo's systems and Tate Research, that actually I'd lost something of the wonderful breadth of the physical scroll. And I'd come back to something of book scale again in some ways and quite contained. Next slide. I don't want to. That's the last piece that the Dundee have, just a section of that scroll. I didn't want to leave my work at 2012 because there's been a lot of other books since then. This was a book that I made for an exhibition. I had a retrospective of reproductions books at Printed Matter, and I made this book and they published it. And I thought it related right back to threads, and just that importance of the beauty of the book as a place to put something in, and to the intimacy of it. It can be a small poem, a visual poem, or it can be a long narrative. The final slide is really showing two ways of showing my books. The Printed Matter retrospective in New York, that I showed all the books and each one could be handled, and then with all the kind of backdrop of how the books were made. And then at the Fruit Market Gallery, the flow across the page was showing all the concertina and scroll works. But I just come back to, for me, the beauty of the book, of this visual and the handling and the kinetic sense of sequence of moving through the book. That's it.
Fantastic, Helen. Thank you. Okay, I see a question has popped up. We've got 4 minutes left for questions. So a question here from Bree. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. And I think this is for Helen. Please, can you say how you worked in collaboration with the children, and did you ask them to do something specific?
Yes, the collaboration with children started with a cookery book with the school, and I saw this wonderful drawing that they were doing. I took in all the objects, and likewise when it came to Water on the Border, I took them down to the burn just by the school, and likewise in China, in Hangzhou, to the lake, and they drew in front of the objects. There was one time when they couldn't in the Chinese school, and there was no translator, and I mimed being a tree, and they all started drawing trees. So that's how I worked with them.
That's great, thank you. I don't see any other questions popping up at the moment. So we're waiting with lots of thank yous and lots of very positive comments about all 4 presentations. So thank you all participants again. And I guess I just maybe wanted to, if we don't have any other questions coming up there, reflect on our presentations, and that, you know, that I guess that it feels like it's very difficult, or that artist books tend to defy taxonomy and tend to defy categorization by their very nature. And this feels like a good place to be, to defy this categorization. And it also feels in a very positive way that it pushes back, and that it's impossible to find a stable definition for them, which I think feels right. It feels like a right and good position, good kind of creative and intellectual position to be in. I see that we are really at time now, and I'm so sorry, everything's always so pinched all the time. But perhaps everybody could switch their mics on very briefly, and we'll give everybody a round of applause. How does everybody feel about doing that?
Good idea.
Thank you all very much. Thank you again to our 4 wonderful presenters. Thank you to Matthew for organising this event. Have a great evening, and please feel free to follow up on any of the of the works that you've seen here today. Obviously, they're very rich, and we do hold a lot of them in our university collections, which are accessible through booking, obviously. So again, thank you all very much. Thank you to our presenters, and have a lovely evening.